Well, hello and welcome to my podcast, Insights on British Policing. During this series, I'll be looking back on my 30 years as a British police officer, tracking a career from its beginnings in the early 1980s to its natural end through retirement in the second decade of the 21st century. I hope to share with you just what it's like to live and breathe one of the toughest jobs going. From the darkest to the brightest aspects of the human condition, from moments of despair to moments of inspiration, from moments of being in mortal fear to moments of uncontrollable laughter, from the occasional wonders of life to the occasional horrors of death. And all of this against the backdrop of the seismic changes of the late 1980s and beyond, which have left British policing diminished in every material sense. So yes, I'm a retired British police officer. I joined one of the country's biggest police forces in 1983, the week after my 21st birthday, and I retired 30 years later at a fairly senior level and having held a wide variety of core and specialist positions, including working with other organisations such as national and local government, the military, the security service and other blue light organisations. During 3 whole decades of service, I watched as a once noble and widely respected profession morphed into a grotesque shadow of its former self. Looking back now, I can see clearly where in the timeline the embryosis of that change took hold, though at the time the realities and demands of day-to-day operational policing meant that the onset of subtle structural changes in the running of larger forces went largely unnoticed, except by those towards the top of the hierarchy who were either driving that change or at least acquiescing in the face of it. In either case, for the most part motivated by self-interest and an unspoken desire to either protect or to advance their own status. At some point in the mid to late 1980s, a 3-letter initialism seemed to arrive from nowhere into the police lexicon. Those 3 letters became embedded into every aspect of policing at every level, from the frontline constables and sergeants all the way up to the chief officer ranks. Without paying homage to those 3 letters, no ambition, however honourably motivated, could hope to be realised. As years went by, I became increasingly and more acutely aware that the gradual erosion of policing standards across the board had its roots in the arrival of those 3 letters and a whole new policing culture driven by government which parted company with the social contract between police and public and which ultimately led to a service largely defined by personal ambitions. It was not ever thus. That 3-letter initialism was KPI, the Key Performance Indicator. I remember clearly my first thoughts when KPIs landed in our laps. As someone who joined the police with much the same mindset as those who joined the military, with a genuine desire to serve my country, I bristled at the arrival of a term which seemed for all the world to belong exclusively in the land of commerce and private enterprise. In short, it had no business pitching up on our doorstep. Looking back now, I can see that what KPIs actually represented was the heavy frontline artillery of an advancing army of data-obsessed government bureaucrats whose strategic objective was nothing less than the corporatisation of the police, and whose investment in the principles of high standards of public service was expressed in words and words alone. I gradually came to despise these people and everything they stood for, and the biggest disgrace of all, some of them were wearing uniform. It's important to understand the backdrop to all of this. In 1983, the Margaret Thatcher government was still riding the crest of a wave formed on the back of victory in the Falklands, and police officers, historically conservative leaning, were enjoying the benefits of a recent and significant increase in pay. This had the effect of cementing in the minds of most regular coppers the notion that an added debt of gratitude and a measure of loyalty over and above that expressed in the oath of office was well and truly owed to the great handbag herself. This sense of allegiance was to become highly significant the following year during the National Coal Miners dispute, when the police found themselves as the executive arm of a government policy determined to suppress working class aspirations and to effectively castrate the union movement by staging a symbolic victory over the National Union of Mine Workers, the NUM. The dispute was to play out between striking miners and the police in a theatre of operations which saw the mass coordination of over 40 police forces by the newly formed National Police Reporting Centre. There was visceral conflict over many months, and the tabloid media, for the most part, lauded the police as nothing less than national heroes. In reality, the motivation of individual police officers was split three ways between their misplaced sense of loyalty to the government, their statutory duty, and the eye-watering amounts of paid overtime on offer. But in many ways, the end of the dispute in 1985, widely regarded as a victory for the authorities, provided the government with a lot of leverage when it came to the later imposition of data-driven performance management. The moves to monitor and hold to account police forces based upon raw data was, in reality, an exercise in dumbing down the intrinsically complex and nuanced nature of managing policing standards in a modern democracy. In short, it was a classic example of a lazy-brained approach by a government of mediocre talents determined to create a Janet and John framework with which to wield power over chief officers. Nothing more than that which was easily measurable was ever measured, and in short order, British policing went from a disciplined service of sworn officers with a ranking command structure to a collection of quasi-corporate bodies where commanders became managers, coppers became salesmen, and the public became customers. This is where the rot set in. But I'd like to start this endeavour with a little much-needed levity. The first two episodes relate to the story of my first true downfall as a police officer, when I spectacularly failed to secure my ambitions as a motorcycle cop back in 1986. On the face of it, this is just one of those coppers' anecdotes which goes down well at social events. But woven into this all-too-true event, and indeed the responses to it, is a greater truth about attitudes at all levels of the British police service. Parts 1 and 2 of Bike Cops Brush with Death were recorded whilst I was out driving the car, so there are occasional references in that regard. But I hope you find these episodes as entertaining as they are interesting. Such is the nature of a 30-year police career in large inner cities. I can't guarantee that will always be the case. Enjoy!